Who is the greatest football player of all time? Debates over who the greatest football player of all time is have been raging ever since football became the most popular sport in the world. This topic provides some of the sport's most passionate and engaging discussions with arguments of all kinds made by people from all professions. From academics to construction workers, everyone who is passionate about football seems to have an idea about what someone needs to do on the pitch or off the pitch over the course of a playing career in order to be considered the best football player of all time. This is further proof that football can unite all kinds of people from all different places and walks of life and give them something they can relate to and talk about with each other even without sharing anything else in common. In summary, when entering this debate, people generally like to be subjective and use arguments that best fit their own narrative. Whether it would be who scored the most goals, who won the most trophies, or who had the most aesthetically pleasing technique, people cannot detach themselves from their biases. And in truth, it would be difficult to ask them to stay objective in a debate that simply cannot have a clear conclusion. Some people like the defensive side of the game, and they would be more likely to pick a defender over a striker, while others love the offensive part, with them probably choosing a striker over a defender or a goalkeeper. Some people might enjoy the grit and determination of players, rather than the talent and the technical ability of others. In this video, I'd like to bring my own ideas to the plate and suggest that maybe comparing players from different generations is nothing more than a fun pastime and it should never be taken too seriously. In my support, I will branch out from 3 simple arguments and expand on each of them to prove why I believe that a definitive answer can never be given and a general consensus will never be reached. Number 1. Rules of the game. Football's long and rich history has had its share of rule changes during its existence, some for the better, some for the worst. From the size of the football to the introduction of VAR, these rules were met with controversy and skepticism every time they were implemented. We're not going to debate whether or not VAR was a good idea, or if we should still have the golden goal rule, or if playing the last fixture of teams in the same group of the World Cup at different dates was a thoroughly researched idea before implementing it, but I think it's important to mention the most important rule changes and how they have impacted the overall feel of the sport. No matter how and why changes were made to the rules of the game, the reality is that players needed time to adapt to them, and we should definitely think about that whenever we try to compare players who played under different rules. Looking back at footage from 50 or 60 years ago, we can definitely see that the game has evolved a lot, and it feels like the players we are comparing with each other simply don't play the same sport. Out of all of the small tweaks here and there, I have identified 3 changes I believe carry the biggest weight on the sport and why it's almost impossible to determine how current players would have fared in the 80s or how their predecessors would do nowadays. The first thing I'm going to refer to is obviously the back pass rule. Prior to 1992, goalkeepers were allowed to handle the ball if it was passed back to them with the foot by a teammate. This led to many teams employing a defensive strategy known as parking the bus, in which they would pass the ball back to the goalkeeper as a means of running down the clock. The back pass rule was introduced in 1992 to prevent this tactic and encourage more attacking play. One of the biggest reasons for this was the 1990 World Cup in Italy, where a lot of games were boring and a lot of games ended up going to penalties. Another thing I want to mention is the implementation of the yellow and red card system. The interpretation of fouls and bookable offenses in football have evolved over time, with the rules being refined and updated to reflect changes in the game. In the early days of football, the rules governing fouls and misconduct were much less strict than they are today. Physical play and rough tackling were common, and players were not always punished for committing fouls or engaging in aggressive behavior. As the game became more organized and popular, the rules were gradually refined and strengthened in order to reduce instances of foul play and promote fair play. One of the major developments in the history of football was the introduction of the red and yellow card system during the 1970 World Cup. The system, which is still in use today, allows referees to caution players for misconduct by showing them a yellow card or send them off the field by showing them a red card. The yellow card system helps to deter players from committing fouls or engaging in aggressive behavior, as they know that they could be shown a card and potentially sent off the field if they do so. In addition to the red and yellow card system, the rules of football have also been updated to better define and punish specific types of fouls and misconduct. For example, rules governing the use of excessive force and dangerous tackles have been strengthened in recent years in order to protect the safety of players. If you look back at footage at how Maradona or Pele were tackled in the past, it's very difficult to imagine them playing in the current format where referees are more protective of players. It's also interesting to think about how current players would have fared during the time where Maradona and Pele were tackled brutally without protection from referees. And the third thing I want to mention here when we talk about the changes in rules is the offside rule. This has undergone several changes since it was first introduced in the early days. The current version of the offside rule states that a player is in an offside position if they are closer to the opponent's goal line than the ball and the second to last opponent, usually the last defender, and this has been in place since the 90s. Prior to this, the offside rule was slightly different. Under the previous versions of the rule, a player was in an offside position if they were closer to the opponent's goal line than the ball and the third to last opponent, usually the last two defenders in this case. This version of the offside was in place from the 1920s up until the 1990s. And before the 1920s, the offside rule was even more complex. Number 2. Evolution of tactical ideas. The second thing I want to mention when speaking about how the sport has changed is the evolution of tactical ideas and football formations. Now obviously they have evolved significantly over the past century, with coaches and managers continually seeking new ways to gain an advantage over their opponents. One notable trend in recent years has been the compression of space between lines, as teams look to defend more effectively and make it more difficult for the opponents to play through the middle. If you look at footage from the 80s or from the 50s, you could see that players like Maradona or Pele had a lot of space to work with between the lines. There were barely any teams playing with defensive midfielders, and the best they could do was put a man marking system in place, but the best players usually found a way to play around that. This is mainly because in the past, football formations were often very rigid, with players adhering to a specific position on the field and being expected to stay in that position. However, modern football has seen a shift towards a more fluid and dynamic formation, with players expected to be able to adapt to different roles and positions depending on the needs of the team and depending on how the game is going. One reason for this shift is the increasing importance of pressing and counter-pressing in football. Teams that are able to press effectively and win the ball back high up the pitch are able to disrupt their opponent's plans and create goal-scoring opportunities for themselves. To do this effectively though, teams need to be able to compress the space between the lines and prevent their opponents from playing vertical passes. Football managers have also highlighted the emphasis of ball retention and possession recycling as a way of controlling the tempo of the game and creating scoring opportunities. This has led to a shift in tactics, with some managers instructing their players to prioritize ball retention over shooting at goal in certain situations. There are a number of reasons why managers might adopt this approach. One reason is that maintaining possession of the ball can help to tire out the opposition and create gaps in their defense that can be exploited. By keeping the ball and moving it around the field, a team can draw out their opponents and create openings for their teammates to make a run or make a pass. Another reason why some managers tend to prioritize ball retention is that it can help to minimize risk of conceding a goal. By keeping the ball, a team reduces the opportunities for their opponents to counterattack and score. This can be particularly important in situations where a team is leading and is looking to protect their advantage. It's worth noting that this approach is not without criticism. By focusing on ball retention and possession recycling, a team may be sacrificing the opportunity to create scoring chances by shooting from distance at goal. This can lead to criticism from fans and media, who may argue that the team is not being ambitious enough or is taking enough risks in attack. Number 3. Training conditions. This is the last point I want to highlight. Modern football training techniques have evolved significantly, with greater emphasis being placed on sports science and the use of technology to improve performance. One key aspect of modern football training is the use of data and analysis to track player performance and identify areas for improvement. This can include the use of GPS tracking devices to monitor players' movement and intensity during training and matches, as well as the use of video analysis software to break down and analyze tactics and techniques. Sports science has also played a key role in modern football training, with teams using a range of techniques to optimize player performance and reduce the risk of injury. This can include use of strength and conditioning programs, nutrition plans, and recovery techniques such as massage and ice baths. It is also likely that modern training pitches of modern football clubs are generally of a higher quality than the official match pitches of the teams that many players in the past had to play on. In recent years, there has been a focus on improving the quality of pitches in order to provide a better playing surface for players and enhance the overall quality of the game. Modern training pitches are often specifically designed and built to meet the need of football teams with the use of advanced technologies and techniques to create a surface that is consistent, smooth, and safer. Many modern training pitches also have state-of-the-art drainage systems, which can help to ensure that the pitch remains in good condition even in wet weather. In contrast, many of the official match pitches that players in the past had to play on were not always of the highest quality. In the past, it was not uncommon for pitches to be uneven, hard, or slippery, which could lead to injuries and affect the quality of play. And I will mention it here again, it is quite fascinating to imagine players like Messi, Ronaldo, or Neymar playing on hard surfaces, on mud, like we have seen Maradona do in the past, or how they themselves would be able to enjoy football on quality pitches that we see and sometimes take for granted nowadays. Okay, so as a conclusion, it's obviously very difficult to definitely determine who the greatest football player of all time is. Opinions on this topic can vary widely. Different people may have different criteria for what makes a great player, like I've said at the beginning, and it can be challenging to compare players from different eras. As we can see, the game has evolved significantly over time. Ultimately, I think it is up to the individual fans and experts to decide who they believe is the greatest football player of all time. There are many talented and successful players to choose from, and different people may have different opinions on who deserves to be at the top of that list. Now, who do you think should be on that short list, and who do you think is the greatest player of all time? Like I've said, it's just a subjective preference, it's just an opinion, and everybody is welcome. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any video ideas or suggestions, feel free to share them in the comments as well. If you want to see a similar video, you might also like this video right here. Make sure to check it out and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends if you thought it was helpful.